مساء الخير وأهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من برنامج واشنطن أونلاين. معي أنا هديل عويس على شبكة نورث بريس. سلم مجلس سوريا الديمقراطية ماسد الأسبوع الماضي مذكرة احتجاج للتحالف الدولي تنديدا بالقصف التركي المستمر على مناطق في شمال شرق سوريا. فهل تدرك واشنطن اليوم خطورة التصعيد التركي في وقت تغلي فيه منطقة الشرق الأوسط بسبب الأحداث الأخيرة في غزة؟ تداعيات التصعيد في المنطقة بدأ يتردد صداها في الغرب أيضا، حيث أقدم رجل في بلجيكا على طعن وقتل مواطنين سويديين. المهاجم ادعى أنه من المتأثرين والتابعين لتنظيم داعش الإرهابي، وسط تقارير غربية تحذر من ارتفاع نسبة الهجمات المتطرفة في المنطقة وفي الغرب. لوك كالهون المقدم الركن السابق في الجيش الأمريكي ينضم إلينا من العاصمة واشنطن ليتحدث معنا عن الأوضاع الأمنية في شمال شرق سوريا. ابقوا معنا للمتابعة. والآن إلى ضيفي السيد لوك كالهون المقدم الركن السابق في الجيش الأمريكي. سيد لوك، الأوضاع الأمنية متدهورة في المنطقة عموما وفي سوريا أيضا خصوصا، حتى قبل الأحداث الأخيرة في غزة هناك الكثير من التحديات الجديدة اليوم على الساحة السورية، ومنها القصف التركي المستمر لمناطق شمال شرق سوريا، هذه المناطق التي يحتجز فيها حتى اليوم الآلاف من مقاتلي تنظيم داعش المتطرف. هل يجب أن تغير الولايات المتحدة من استراتيجيتها السياسية والأمنية والعسكرية لشمال شرق سوريا، بما في ذلك شكل وجودها وشكل تعاملها مع المكونات السياسية والعسكرية في المنطقة؟
Well, first of all, Hadil, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I appreciate you inviting me on again. And I do enjoy talking about this topic because my heart is with the people in eastern Syria. And it concerns me about the recent attacks that have been occurring, particularly upon the civilian population. I agree with you that there's several facets to this problem set. I think first and foremost, the U.S. needs to reiterate with the people of eastern Syria, with the SDF, and with the region that they are still committed to the fight against ISIS, something that has been happening for several years now and has really gone to the back burner because of some of the issues of late. But I think a re-acknowledgement that ISIS is still an issue and that the U.S. is there for the long term would be very important from the DoD perspective. From the Department of State perspective, I think it would be very important for people like leaders like Blinken to reiterate to the Turkish government that the types of attacks that they're doing, although in theory or in practice, they're saying this is as a result or a response to the terrorist attack to the Ministry of Interior in Turkey on the 1st of October. A lot of the targets they're hitting are civilian targets. They're hitting water pumping stations. They're hitting dams. They're hitting the type of infrastructure that is significantly and negatively affecting the people in eastern Syria. So I would call upon the State Department first and foremost to engage with the Turkish government and make sure they understand that these types of targets are hurting civilians and not positively affecting the fight against terrorism. And then secondly, I think the Department of Defense and the Biden administration needs to reinforce the fact that the U.S. is there for the long term and they're there to fight ISIS, something they've been doing hand in hand with the SDF for several years now.
من تجربتك مع الجيش الأمريكي يا سيد كالهون، هل بإمكان وزارة الدفاع الأمريكية التأثير على قرارات ورؤية وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية فيما يتعلق بملف شمال شرق سوريا؟ يعني هل يمكن أن يتم رفع سوية وشكل التعاون مع القوات الشريكة، قوات سوريا الديمقراطية، لضمان استتباب الأمن على الأرض ونجاح مهمة وزارة الدفاع في ضمان هزيمة تنظيم داعش؟
They can, but Hadil, as you know, and for your viewers, just a quick explanation, is that the Department of Defense has taken the world and they've divided into combatant commands. And the challenge here is that Syria falls in the Central Command, which is primarily the Middle East, whereas Turkey falls in European Command. So it falls under two separate commanders. And that is what creates the challenge in messaging when it comes to the Turkish government, is that the commander for the Central Command, which includes Syria, has to then go through the European commander to talk to the NATO ally, which is Turkey, and then also to talk to the State Department, which has to weigh the challenges of geopolitics between Europe, between Turkey and the Middle East. So it's very complicated. But in short, I think it's important for DoD to present that message to Turkey. But in light of what I've just explained, it is complicated.
هل لا يزال هناك تعاطف سياسي أمريكي مع مجلس سوريا الديمقراطية؟ هل لا يزال هناك دفع شعبي وسياسي أمريكي لصناع القرار لتعزيز الشراكة مع مجلس سوريا الديمقراطية وأيضا قوات سوريا الديمقراطية؟
So there is definitely there's several layers to this. I will tell you that there has always been a solidarity between the Department of Defense and particularly the forces like the Army and the other coalition forces that are in eastern Syria. There's always been that solidarity between the SDF and the people in eastern Syria, which goes back even back into the early 90s when you had the northern no-fly zone during the Saddam Hussein regime. So that will always be relevant, and that will always be there. I think that what SDF and the Autonomous Administration needs to do is to reinforce with the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. and through the media is to show that there still is a threat when it comes to ISIS. And although that current understanding of the ISIS threat may be overtaken by recent events, highlighting the fact that this issue still exists and still is prevalent, I think would be important and an important leveraging point by the SDF and by the Autonomous Administration in ensuring that there is a long-term commitment, not only by DoD, which does exist, but by the Department of State in ensuring that as long as there's stability in eastern Syria, that is a counterbalance to the instability that ISIS creates through the region.
سيد لوك، بالتأكيد تابعت حادثة إسقاط المسيرة التركية بواسطة F-16 مقاتلة أمريكية، وهذه حادثة نادرة يتم من خلالها إسقاط مسيرة لدولة في حلف الناتو عبر مقاتلة لدولة أخرى في حلف الناتو هي الولايات المتحدة. كيف قرأت هذه الحادثة؟ ما هي الأبعاد السياسية لما حدث؟
That was an interesting case, Hadil, and I've talked to several friends of mine about this. My impression is that this was more of a tactical decision, more of a time-sensitive tactical decision, where the U.S. forces on the ground identified a drone. At the time, they probably didn't understand exactly who was flying that drone, but they did see that drone was close to their perimeter, and from a force protection perspective, they probably went ahead and downed it. I doubt, although it could be the case, I doubt this was a larger plan by the commander on the ground to shoot down a Turkish drone. He was probably shooting down a drone that was threatening his forces at the time, and then later realized that it was of Turkish origin.
لوك، هناك من جديد زخم أمريكي كبير باتجاه التركيز على منطقة الشرق الأوسط بعد الأحداث الأخيرة في غزة. تطورات كثيرة تحدث مرتبطة بما يحدث في غزة، بعضها مرتبط بالملف السوري بسبب ارتباطات حماس بإيران. أين يجب أن يتموضع مجلس سوريا الديمقراطية سياسيا من كل ما يحدث اليوم في المنطقة لكي يكون هناك استفادة لشمال شرق سوريا من هذه العودة الأمريكية المستجدة للمنطقة؟
Hadil, that is a really good question, and it's a complicated answer. I'll try to couch it from this perspective. The leadership of the SDF probably needs to use this, or I would suggest that they use this situation to show that terrorism and the influence of Iran is still very prevalent in Syria. So this is not just about ISIS. A lot of particularly Westerners and specifically the U.S., when they look at eastern Syria, they just look at ISIS and the fact that they feel that it's been geographically defeated the last couple of years. So the average person in the U.S. doesn't understand the complicating factors of eastern Syria. I think this would be a great opportunity for SDF and the Autonomous Administration to tell their counterparts and tell the American people that what's at stake in eastern Syria is not just an ISIS question, it is an Iran question. And the SDF is not only a counterbalance to the ongoing threat of ISIS, it is a counterbalance to Iranian hegemony within Syria, or at least within eastern Syria. I think that's the message that they should be taking to Washington and taking to the American people.
لوك، بعد انتهاء خدمتك في الجيش الأمريكي انخرطت في عدة مشاريع إنمائية في منطقة الشرق الأوسط، ومنها مشاريع في منطقة شمال وشرق سوريا. هل لا يزال هناك التزام واهتمام أمريكي بتوجيه المساعدات المتعلقة بالبنى التحتية، بإعادة إعمار المنطقة وتطوير المنطقة ماليا واقتصاديا في شمال شرق سوريا؟ هل لا يزال هناك تركيز أمريكي على مسألة تحسين الأوضاع المالية والاقتصادية لضمان هزيمة تنظيم داعش الإرهابي، ولضمان محاربة ومكافحة أيضا الأفكار المتطرفة؟ لأنك مثل ما تعرف تقارير وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية لطالما تحدثت عن تراجع الأوضاع المالية والاقتصادية في المنطقة على أنها أحد أهم المسببات لانضمام عدد كبير من الشباب إلى تنظيم داعش.
Again, very good questions. When Russia invaded Ukraine in the spring of last year, that was a big blow to the humanitarian efforts in eastern Syria. In interacting with my counterparts at the Department of State and USAID, the funding for Syria was almost cut in half because those funds were redirected to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian people during their fight against the Russians. My fear is that this attack in Israel is going to do something similar, in that at the very least, it's going to take the spotlight even more away from eastern Syria and highlight Ukraine, and then also highlight Israel. And so I think further funding cuts, we may be seeing that in the future. That said, with the funding that is left over, I think that the focus needs to continue to be on clean water, access to clean water, food security, and then also power. Those are the things that eastern Syria really needs, because those types of things lead to better health benefits. It leads to just a better quality of life for the people in eastern Syria. So I would really encourage the State Department to not take the eye off the ball in eastern Syria, but to continue to focus on infrastructure repair and improvement, and particularly in the fields of power and food security and water security as well. And now I'll reiterate what I said earlier, is that I believe that the State Department and Blinken needs to interact with the Turkish government and make it clear that infrastructure should not be on their target list. If they truly are concerned about terrorism, the water projects, the electrical grid, and things of that nature need to be preserved for the innocent people in eastern Syria. And so at the same time as the U.S. government needs to, reinforce their cooperation against terrorism with Turkey, they also need to make it clear that there are certain there's certain infrastructure in eastern Syria that needs to be off the table when it comes to targeting, because that infrastructure is supporting innocent civilians. And also, to your point, the targeting of this type of infrastructure, it hurts the humanitarian process, because there are a lot of humanitarian investors who are looking at Syria right now and looking at large infrastructure projects, and they are second guessing whether they want to commit to eastern Syria, because their fear is that those infrastructure projects that they are going to invest in will be targets in the future. So not only does the Turkish targeting of infrastructure affect the people on the ground immediately, it also affects the future funding for infrastructure projects in eastern Syria.
شكرا لك ضيفي المقدم الركن السابق في الجيش الأمريكي السيد لوك كالهان، كنت معنا من واشنطن.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
وختاما شكرا لكل متابعي واشنطن أونلاين، ألقاكم في حلقة جديدة الأسبوع المقبل، إلى اللقاء.